Okay, sorry about that. Questions?
What do you think the benefits were for you for leaving Plym for even just a short period of time?
It's a really good question. I think that it was a huge benefit, and I am a very, very big proponent of especially students and young folks having the opportunity to get outside their comfort zone and really, have the space to explore the United States, because especially coming from, smaller states and rural states, it can be easy to sort of like have that be your world. There was a solid period of my life where, my perception of the world was not much bigger than the 93 corridor, whereas just like, down to Boston and, like up to Maine, over to Vermont was really my world for for a large portion of my childhood. But I had the benefit of sort of having an international perspective because my father is actually from the Dominican Republic. And although my mother and my father divorced when I was really young, my mom had a great affinity for the island. And so we spent some time both as children and also in high school as adults living in the Dominican Republic and studying down there. So I think that's what really gave me a little bit of that thirst, that sort of understanding that there was more or there were, different places that I wanted to explore, which is why I think that it's important for students to sort of like have that opportunity. And I understand that it's not, for everyone. And I'm not saying it to, put down anyone who chose to, go to an in-state school or chose to, stay in New Hampshire, because I think that's also a very worthwhile path. I think that it was just for me, especially as a person of color in New Hampshire, I was like very hungry to, find places, to be frank, with more, diverse populations where, I grew up my entire life being what I call the lonely only, where, there's not that many other people of color around in town. Like me and my brothers used to joke that we could count all the people of color we knew on our hands, and we didn't need all our fingers, because there's not that many folks around here. And I think that was also a big push for me to just sort of understand how people of color saw themselves or understood themselves in a very different setting. Because I had grown up sort of understanding a New Hampshire context, but then, I would hear discussions or I would hear conversations going on, at a national level, and I would just sort of feel a little bit of a disconnect where I was like, well, that doesn't really seem to be happening in New Hampshire, but it does seem to be happening. So maybe I need to get a little bit outside of New Hampshire to sort of figure out the answers to these questions that I have. So it's definitely a decision that I'm happy I made. It's one that really allowed me to see a lot more of the United States, of the world. I had a great opportunity with a scholarship program that I got at Ithaca to, travel internationally. So it's been something that gave me a lot of opportunity to experience different places. But I've also, as you can, as I've said, sort of circled back to Plymouth and to Plymouth State, because I think that it is a place that, I do feel deeply rooted in and have a lot of connections to. And, New Hampshire in general is a place that I have a very, a large amount of goodwill and good feeling towards, because it's a very beautiful place to live, and it's a very interesting place to live. I think it's one of those things where as you grow older, you start to appreciate a lot of the uniqueness of New Hampshire that you can't really appreciate when you're a younger person, simply because, a lot of the things that become more interesting as you get older are things that just don't really interest you when you're younger. But one of the things that, was really interesting to me, and part of what drew me back, was just sort of the political scene and how open it is. It's one of the few places in the United States where there really is very little barrier to entry to entering politics. And excuse me. Actually, one of my fun facts is that the New Hampshire state legislature is the third largest governing English speaking political body in the world after United States Congress and I think the House of Parliament in England. So we have a really large state legislature, but we have a very small population. So that means that representation is much more, there's many more people, many fewer people represented per representative. So in that way, you have people who you've met on the street who are state representatives and state senators, and like people who go to Cafe Monte Alto, you'll see, like some state rep plates and you'll be like, oh, I wonder who that is. But, they just could be anyone. And I think that that's part of the beauty of New Hampshire is that like people have a great degree of ownership over what happens in the state. And like, I think that or worse, I think that that's a tradition and that's a big part of sort of New Hampshire identity. And that was something that I liked and I was drawn to. But, overall, I think that it was a really good experience to get out of Plymouth at the same time to just sort of see what else was out there. But, that's just me.
I would like to ask you about diversity, since you were talking a little bit, you touched on it a little bit. How have you seen it change throughout the year, like the diversity here, particularly here in Plymouth? Have you seen positive effects, or what has been your experience?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would say that in terms of the town, excuse me, I feel like a frog in my throat. In terms of the town, there hasn't been too much movement in terms of the population. It's pretty solidly, white working class rural community. But I will say that there has been a large shift, at least from what I've observed, not having the raw numbers in front of me, but just, from my own perception, I've noticed, as the years have progressed, like a larger and larger share of PSU students being students of color and coming from, places outside of New Hampshire and really exposing both the community and, the campus community to, a broader section of, the American public. And it's been noticeable that there have been more students of color, more Black folks, more Latino folks, more Asian folks. I will say, obviously it's not anything to write home about. There's still it's still a small section of the PSU population, but it's a small and growing section, I would say, portion of the PSU population. And I would say that has really sort of forced a lot of the town to confront some of the ideas and sort of the perceptions and just sort of like a generic cultural cold shoulder that people give outsiders up here, and sort of put that to the test and sort of helped people get out of their comfort zone a little bit. Because I know when I was a lot younger, I was much more accustomed to getting the stink eye from people, or just getting stared at as I was walking down the street, and not in any sort of malicious way, but just in terms of people being very taken aback at seeing a brown face in this thoroughly white space. So it's been nice in that people are slowly just sort of becoming accustomed to and acclimated to having people of color in town and at the university studying. And so that's been a really interesting sort of change that's been happening. And it's one that's, it's been subtle, but it's one that, I've noticed has definitely changed over time, where when I was a lot younger, when I was in elementary school or high school, I didn't really like walking downtown. If I had a place to go, I'd go to the place, but I wouldn't really, spend time meandering up or down Main Street because, it's just sort of like uncomfortable to like, have every passing car sort of be like, oh, wow, what's he doing here? When, you're like bro, I'm just trying to get some ice cream, you know. It's like I'm not trying to, you know, put on a show or anything. But yeah, I was it's a interesting, it's interesting, you know, whenever you talk about diversity in New Hampshire, because, you know, it's one of those things where it's growing, but you got to really pay attention to see, you know, like how, where, and when it's growing.
Questions?
I think he answered all of my questions.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I guess I could just give some broader background. I realized I didn't really introduce myself that much, but my name's Marc Gonzalez. I'm 28 years old. I've, as I said before, you know, grown up and lived in Plymouth, New Hampshire on and off for most of that time. I went to, again, undergrad at Ithaca College in upstate New York, and I'm back for grad school. I went to private high school in New Hampshire, Sant Bonnie High School. I don't know if that's too deep a cut for anyone to really remember that, because the school did shut its doors. But I did go to Sant Bonnie High School. I was one of the last high school alumnus of Sant Bonnie High School, and yeah, I went to Plymouth Elementary School. Other than that, but yeah, that's just a broad bio.
You know, Mark, I was watching a show the other day, and it was taking place here in New Hampshire. And what I found interesting is that one of the main characters was saying, this person came to New Hampshire from another city, and she was driving around trying to find a Starbucks. So she kept driving and driving, and then she said she realized that she wasn't going to find one. So
Yeah.
I thought it was funny, but I guess my question is regarding businesses here in New Hampshire. Like, if you live in a city, you have access to um, different products, right? That
Yep.
we take for granted. But when you live most of your life here, it's sort of like something that doesn't happen here. Like, what has been your experience regarding that?
Um, it's been really funny, to be honest, because you know, I grew up in New Hampshire, so one of the things that you just sort of culturally don't really think twice about is no sales tax, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, no income tax in general. But the sales tax is always one that is the most bitter slap in the face every time you set foot outside of New Hampshire. It's just a, you know, it's just like dousing yourself with the cold water of reality that, like, oh yeah, other places have taxes to pay for things and we just don't do that. But in terms of like actual items, I think the one that really broke my heart the first time I went outside of New Hampshire in the fall was apple cider. Oh Lord, apple cider. Like, I didn't realize that that was, you know, a costly item outside of, you know, New England or New Hampshire. But, you know, when I was living, because after I graduated from Ithaca, I was working in the film industry in New York for a little bit, in New York City. And I, like, you know, I was just getting homesick like crazy, obviously, because it's a big city and I am a pretty country boy at heart. So I was like, well, the least I can do is, you know, just sort of like get some cider. You know, I can get some cider, I can drink some cider, remind me of home. And, you know, like I go and I try and buy, you know, like a gallon of cider at Market Basket, you know, in season is, you know, maybe like maybe $2, two something. You know, it's pretty cheap. It's not, you know, it's not nothing, but it's definitely not expensive. And, you know, when I was in New York, like that same gallon of cider, if I was getting it, I had to buy like half gallons, and it was, you know, like the half gallon was like $5 for a half gallon of cider, Whereas, like in New Hampshire, I was getting like a full gallon for $2. It may seem like, I'm really splitting hairs and I'm just like moaning about nothing, but it's one of those things where you start to realize just how much of, New Hampshire business is really, like localized, and, like how much of New Hampshire sort of serves itself in terms of, like maple syrup and things like that, in terms of apple cider and things like that, dairy products. There's a lot of things that New Hampshire actually does for itself, that, like a lot of, I think New Hampshire folks don't really appreciate. But I think also, I think going outside of New Hampshire and realizing just how narrowly tailored a lot of the businesses can be. And I think like the one arena that really is clear is restaurants and the food industry, where, you know, get like Chinese food, or, for instance, or, like any sort of ethnic food, like up here in New Hampshire, it's like there's like a place, it's like the Chinese food restaurant, like the Mexican restaurant. Whereas, like when you're in places that have, more diverse populations, or, even just have, like more people moving through the physical space itself, considering, New Hampshire's up and sort of like that northern tail end of America, it's easy for a lot of people to not make their way up here, So, just not having that sort of cultural sort of melding that there have been in a lot of other places. Like, I think that one of my favorite things about New York, as opposed to New Hampshire, was how much was at your fingertips. And part of that was, city living, but also, with the other places that I had lived in upstate New York, was just about, like the bigger population, the more people who have, like moved around in the state and are moving, to different jobs and locations in the state. So, like even when I was in Ithaca, there was like always no shortage of different types of food and types of restaurants that were coming up. Whereas, I can, really think of, like, I can remember and think of like every restaurant that has existed in my lifetime in Plymouth. And, there hasn't been all that much turnover. The Bull and Beer House became the Lucky Dog Tavern. Biederman's has been there since, time immemorial. You got Mandarin Taste has been there, ever since the Wangs moved to town. There's a lot of stuff that has like just been here and, not really moved. Or, like some of the pizza places, they might change the name, like Manny's becomes Downtown Pizza, becomes Brothers Pizza, it goes back to Downtown Pizza, but still serves pizza. you know we get a new restaurant like Grotto, and we get like some Italian food, which is like, I was really surprised, at how popular it was out of nowhere. And then I remembered, oh yeah, we live in Plymouth. There's not all that much, in terms of new dining happening all that often. So, when those places come up, they're sort of talk of the town for a little bit, because, so little change does happen in that regard. So I think that's the one thing that I've noticed from, going to places outside of New Hampshire to living inside, a small town in New Hampshire, is just how much more change and how much more influx a lot of things seem to be in other places, as opposed to, here, where things sort of have the ability to be a little bit more static and established, which is a blessing and a curse in different ways, in different arenas, depending on what you like.
I would like to say before I let you go, I guess I ask you in a sense. My students are freshmen, right? So what would you tell them, since this class is Think Local, and the idea is how can we be more part of this community? What would you suggest to them, since they're going to be here for 4 years? How can they be part of this community? How can they contribute? How can they make Plymouth their home during their time here at Plymouth State?
Yeah, it's a really good question. you know, it's obviously it's changed with the times a little bit, but you know, hopefully we will, you know, move past and get through this trying time of COVID and move to a more, you know, normalized setting where, you know, we can have more interactions face to face. And, you know, in that vein, I would say that, you know, whether virtually or not, one of the things that's always, you know, I've always heard from my friends who have lived in town, you know, I've always seen from the students that I've worked with in town, and always, you know, felt myself as a student, as someone who's grown up on campus really as much as off campus, was, you know, don't underestimate the power of your impact as college students, simply, you know, inhabiting this space and doing what you do. You know, sometimes it might seem, you know, like no one's paying attention, or, you know, like you're just sort of going through the motions, and, you know, like you're like, I'm just going to college because I'm going to college, you know, I'm getting this degree. And, you know, like that's totally valid, and I understand that, you know, like no one's trying to put anything more on your plate than you're ready to take on. But I will say that, you know, don't underestimate how impactful you can be for young people in this community, just by sort of showing your face and, you know, like being a recognizable college student, you know, sort of like what I was talking about before, where, you know, like if they know Lauren or Jack or Zachary or Abby, then, you know, it sort of humanizes the entire arena of college. You know, it ceases to be college students, and now it's Jack, it's Abby, it's Zach, who is a college student. So then it becomes something that people can do as opposed to something that people are, which can make it seem sort of an unattainable sort of idea for some people who, you know, sort of harbor some self-doubts. um, Another thing that I would say is, don't underestimate the power of your voice on campus, because, you know, this university is here for you. And when students, you know, organize and ask for things, or, you know, demand things, or say like this isn't working, or this is working, or we want more of this, we want less of this, the administration is put on notice, you know, because you are the reason for the university's existence. And, you know, like as much as they might try and, you know, like have you think of that power dynamic in any number of ways, you know, at the end of the day, they're here to serve your needs, you know. And like academically, the things that you can push on are very different, obviously, because there's a lot more regiment to that, and there's a lot more considerations. But in terms of, you know, campus life, and in terms of, you know, community involvement and, you know, programming and things like that, you know, you have a huge and really outsized voice on this campus, you know, where the administration might not listen to faculty, they definitely might listen to students, you know, because faculty are employees, whereas students are the people coming and paying for these services. So I would say that that's another thing that, you know, don't, you know, not to be taken for granted. You know, if you see things that, you know, you don't like on this campus, or you see things that you do like, you want to, you know, like have it known that these things are working really well. You know, that's also a really a really important point that I find that a lot of college students don't understand, is that, like, you know, saying that something's working well can sometimes be just as important as saying that something's broken. You know what I mean? Just, you know, like giving that student voice and support to different things can matter a lot. And then lastly, I would say, you know, just not being a stranger in the community. You know, I know that it's very tempting to just sort of sequester yourself on campus, especially in these times. It's a little bit more forgivable. Obviously, that's kind of what we should be doing. Um, but, you know, as things move forward and, you know, like things hopefully open up in the future, just understanding that, you know, and especially given the fact that we've been so sort of sequestered in our own spaces, that, you know, moving forward, when the time does come that we are able to, you know, sort of move more freely out and about with less worry, to really not be afraid of just, you know, exploring a little bit in the community, and, you know, like branching out a little bit further than you had before, or, you know, like talking with that student group that, you know, like, you know, volunteers at, you know, that that ASPCA, or, you know, like volunteers at, you know, like this school in an after school program or things like that. Because again, I think that college students also, you know, sort of deny themselves a little bit of an opportunity to put some of the stuff that they're learning in, you know, in conversation with real life. Because, you know, one of the things that I've always found with a college education is that, you know, like as much as it may seem like it's very much tied to certain things, the ideas and, you know, the thinking and the critical thinking skills that you get, you can apply to anything. So it's really about, you know, taking the experience that you have and really trying to apply it to the situations that you see and you will find, you know, in the community and in the, you know, like the broader New Hampshire area. So I guess, you know, the grand total message would just be, you know, don't underestimate yourself because, you know, you all are very, you know, important members of the campus community and also very important members of the Plymouth community. And I think that that part can sometimes sort of get pushed to the side a little bit more than it should be. So, you know, just keep that in mind.